Montana Territory, 1879. The wind curled sharp through the canyon as gunfire cracked behind her. Adalyn O'Quinn gripped both children tighter, one on each hand, skirts heavy with creek water as she dragged them up the embankment. "Keep running," she said, breathless, her voice low but firm. "Do not stop, no matter what." Colton coughed behind her, his tiny lungs still rattling from smoke while Clara stumbled again, her bare feet raw from the rocks. The twins had not spoken since the fire, since their home was turned to ash and their father shot dead in front of them. Adalyn had not meant to get involved. She was just the teacher in the mining settlement of Elks Crossing, barely 4 months into the job. But when she heard the gunshots that night and saw the flames licking at the sky from the orphaned Prescott cabin, she had saddled her horse without thinking. Now, with the children trembling behind her and a man still tracking them through the trees, her only thought was survival. A rifle cracked again closer. She shoved the twins toward the trees. "Hide behind those rocks, stay low." They obeyed without question. Adalyn turned, heart pounding so loud she almost missed the sound of hooves fast, heavy. She braced herself, lifting the small pistol she had taken from the Prescott cabin before they fled. She only had 2 bullets left. A rider shot out from the tree line. She raised the pistol. "Do not shoot," the man called, reining in hard. His voice was deep, urgent. He jumped down from the saddle before the horse fully stopped. "I am not with them." His hat was low over his brow, dust streaking his coat. A rifle was slung across his back, but his hands were up. "I have been tracking them since last night," he added. "You are Adalyn O'Quinn, right? The school teacher?" She gave a single nod, not lowering the pistol. The man looked past her toward the rocks. "Are the children safe? How do you know who I am?" "Folks talk. Elks Crossing is not that big, and I saw the smoke. Been looking for you since dawn. My name is Silas Stroud." She narrowed her eyes. "You a bounty hunter?" "No. Just a cowboy who does not like seeing children hunted like deer." Behind her, Clara whimpered. Silas took 1 step forward, slow. "You are shaking. Let me help." Adalyn's arms trembled. She did not want to trust him. But she could not keep going on foot, not with 2 wounded children and a man still behind them. She finally lowered the pistol. Silas moved fast then, but not toward her, toward the rocks where Colton had started to cry. He crouched low, his voice soft as he reached them. "You two all right?" They nodded, wide-eyed. Silas lifted Clara gently in his arms. "We need to ride. Now." Adalyn grabbed Colton, holding him tight to her chest as Silas mounted with Clara. He reached down and hauled Adalyn up behind him with practiced strength, then turned the horse and kicked into a gallop. They rode for what felt like forever, until the sun dipped low and the trees opened into an old trapper's cabin tucked against the hills. It was abandoned, but dry. Inside, Silas lit a fire and set Clara down on a wool blanket. Adalyn knelt beside Colton, brushing soot from his curls. "You kept them alive," Silas said gently. Adalyn looked up, her eyes tired. "They are just children." "What was I supposed to do?" He shrugged off his coat and crouched to check Clara's foot. "Most would have run the other way." "I am not most," Silas gave a quiet nod. "No, you are not." Outside, the wind picked up again. Inside, the fire pushed back the chill. Later, after the twins had fallen asleep between them, Silas handed her a tin mug with lukewarm coffee. "You have people back in Elks Crossing?" he asked. "I came alone, left everything behind in Ohio." "Why?" She hesitated. "Needed to start over." He waited. "My husband died." 2 years ago, fever, I needed distance." Silas looked into the fire. "That is something I understand." "You lost someone," he nodded. "My older brother, 6 years back, Ute raid. We were running cattle near the Utah line. He did not make it." The fire crackled. Adalyn sipped the bitter coffee. "You did not have to come for us." "No, but I did." "Why?" Silas glanced at her then. "Because when I saw you ride into that fire alone last night, I knew you were the kind of woman who does not back down, and that is rare." She blinked, caught off guard. He looked away then, busying himself with checking the rifle. "You should sleep, I will keep watch." But Adalyn did not sleep for a long time, Not because of fear, but because something had shifted inside her. Silas had not known her, yet he had come, he had not asked for anything. And he had not looked at her like she was fragile or broken. She watched him as he sat by the door, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the dark. She had not expected anyone to defend her, but he had. And something about that made her chest ache in a way she had not felt in years. The morning came cold and gray, with fog clinging low over the hills like a wet sheet. Adalyn stepped outside the cabin, the hem of her dress damp with dew, her arms wrapped across her middle as she watched the sun try to rise behind the clouds. The children were still asleep, curled together under the wool blanket. Silas had not moved from his place by the door, though his eyes were closed now, chin lowered to his chest. She didn't wake him. Instead, she walked a few paces into the clearing, kneeling beside the stream that ran just past a thicket of alder. She dipped her hands in the water, the cold biting, and scrubbed the soot from her fingers. Her reflection looked older than she remembered, hair tangled, eyes swollen from too little rest, but something steadier had settled behind her gaze. "You're up early," Silas said behind her, quiet. She dried her hands on her skirt before standing. "Couldn't sleep." The quiet felt too loud. He joined her, one hand resting on his belt, the other rubbing the back of his neck. "We've got maybe 3 hours before someone picks up the trail again. I'll take the horse and ride south. There's a surveyor's outpost near the pass, 2 men stationed there year-round. If they've seen anything, we'll know. And if they haven't, I'll leave word. If I'm not back by nightfall, you ride north with the children. There's a Mennonite farmstead near the river bend. Tell them my name, they'll take you in." Adalyn shook her head. "I'm not leaving without knowing what happened to the man who started this." Silas studied her. "He's not just some outlaw. No, he knew the twins' father. There was something in the way he said his name." Silas nodded once. "Then I'll find out who he is." A crow passed overhead, its wings slicing through the mist. Neither of them spoke for a while. She looked over. "You always this willing to risk yourself for strangers?" "Not usually." "Then why now?" Silas bent down, lifted a flat stone from the dirt, and thumbed it once before tossing it into the stream. "I've seen what happens when nobody steps in, and I've lived with the weight of not doing enough. I won't carry that again." Adalyn didn't push further. She understood the kind of guilt that lived in silence. Back inside, Colton had woken and was sitting upright, legs pulled to his chest. His eyes followed Silas when he re-entered, wary but curious. Silas crouched beside him. "You like horses?" The boy nodded once. "I'll teach you how to ride proper when things settle, but first I need to make sure it's safe for you and your sister." Colton's voice was hoarse. "Will he come back?" Silas met his eyes. "Not if I find him first." After Silas rode out, the hours dragged. Adalyn kept the cabin door bolted, her pistol within reach. Clara helped her gather kindling, her limp less pronounced now, while Colton traced shapes in the dirt with a stick. Adalyn watched them and wondered what it would be like to raise them not as a duty, but as a choice. Near mid-afternoon, she heard hooves again, 2 riders this time. She drew her pistol and pulled the children behind her, heart thudding. But it was Silas and another man with a long white beard and a battered hat. They dismounted quickly. "This is Elias," Silas said, leading the man forward. "He runs the surveyor's post. Says he saw tracks 4 men, heavy load, riding fast. They passed his outpost just before dawn." Elias nodded. "One of them had an old army coat, said he was hunting deserters, but I've seen my share of bounty men. This wasn't that." Adalyn looked to Silas. "Then what was it?" "Revenge," Silas said, jaw tight. "I found a letter at the Prescott land, half burned, but the name was clear Wyatt Holden. He and Prescott fought together in the war, went south after, guessing something went bad between them." Clara clutched her arm. "That's the man who shot Papa." Adalyn knelt. "You saw his face," the girl nodded. "He had a scar down his cheek, and he said Papa owed him." Elias looked grim. "If it's Holden, you'll never outrun him. He rolls through men like fire in dry grass." Adalyn straightened. "Then we don't run." Silas turned to her. "You sure? You said yourself you've lived with not doing enough, so have I." "I won't do it again." He studied her, something flickering in his gaze, not surprise, not doubt, just a quiet respect that settled deep. "All right," he said. "Then we make a plan. And we end this." They worked through the evening, mapping out the terrain, checking the rifle powder, showing Adalyn how to reload faster. Clara fell asleep in her lap. Colton curled near the fire, holding the stick Silas had carved for him into a little horse. Later, as the stars came out, Adalyn stepped outside. Silas was already there, leaning against the porch post, watching the sky. "You ever think you'd end up here?" she asked. He gave a soft laugh. "Not like this, no. I was supposed to be teaching handwriting. Not hiding in the hills with a pistol." He looked over at her. "You regret it," she shook her head. "Not for a second." Silas's voice was low. "You're stronger than you think." She didn't look away. "So are you." Something passed between them, then not a promise, not anything said aloud. But it settled deep, like the first warmth of spring under frozen earth. Neither of them moved. They didn't need to. The fire inside the cabin burned steady, and for the first time in days, the night felt less like a threat and more like a beginning. By the third day, the air had turned dry and sharp. Pine needles cracked underfoot as Silas led Adalyn and the children down a sloping deer trail, their steps deliberate, their breath hushed. A hawk circled high above, its cry distant, disinterested. Below, the land opened into a narrow stretch of canyon that silenced wind and sound alike. Silas paused just inside the tree line and motioned them to halt. "There's a saddle cut up ahead," he said, lowering his voice. "Good vantage. I'll climb up, see if Holden's crew made camp near the waterline." Adalyn kept one hand on Colton's shoulder, the other resting on the pistol tucked in her waistband. "You think they're still close? They're waiting on something, or someone. They're not rushing. That makes them dangerous." Clara leaned against her, thumb in her mouth, eyes tracking the clouds. Adalyn brushed a loose curl behind the girl's ear. "We'll stay here. Go careful." Silas nodded and disappeared into the slope without sound. It took longer than she liked. The children sat still, crouched behind a fallen log while Adalyn kept her back to the trees, scanning the trail behind them. Every creak of wood or shift in branches made her spine stiffen. When Silas returned, his face was set hard. "They're there, 3 of them. Holden's among 'em. Horse is limping, so they're grounded for now. They've got a campfire low and covered with stone. Looks like they're expecting to hold that ground. Any sign they saw us?" "None. But they've got rifles out and they ain't talking much. This isn't a bounty. This is personal." Adalyn glanced toward the narrowing canyon. "How do we get ahead of them?" "There's an old dry sluice path. Miners cut it a few years back. If we take it, we'll circle above them by evening." "How steep?" "Clara won't make it on foot." He looked at her then. "But I can carry her if you take Colton." "What happens when we get above them? I'll draw them out. When they come up the ridge, you take the children north." Elias left a trail marker tree near the ridgeline. "Follow the double-notch cut. It'll lead you to the Mennonite farm." Adalyn's jaw tensed. "I didn't come this far to run." Silas stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "You're not running, you're protecting them. Holden won't stop until one of us makes him. That part falls to me." She didn't look away. "I won't let you do it alone." "You won't be. I'm asking you to do the harder thing, walk away while someone fights for you." The words settled deep. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with faith, not pity. She nodded once. They climbed slowly. The sluice path had eroded, the rock edges brittle and sharp. Silas carried Clara on his back, his breath steady despite the incline. Adalyn kept Colton close, her hand never leaving his. The boy didn't speak, but his grip never loosened. By dusk, the ridge opened into a narrow shelf above the canyon. Silas set Clara down and moved to the edge, lying flat, watching the shadows below. "They've split up," he murmured. "Holden's alone now, checking the horses. The other 2 are boiling coffee near the fire." Adalyn crouched beside him. "What now?" "I go down quiet. If I can take one before he sees me, the second'll break. He's young, barely more than a boy. And Holden, he'll come running. That's when you move." She reached for his sleeve. "Don't let him draw you into a trap. He's already in mine." He stood and looked at her, shadows cutting across his face but his eyes steady. "If I don't come back, no." She shook her head. "I won't carry that." He gave a slow breath. "Then I'll come back." Silas vanished down the slope without another word. Adalyn waited, every muscle tight, every second louder than the last. Colton clutched her arm. Clara pressed her face to her side. Then a sharp cry echoed off the stone, followed by the crack of a rifle. She didn't run. She pulled the children tighter and listened. Another shot rang out. Then silence, her breath caught, then footsteps. Silas emerged over the ridge, dragging a canvas rifle bag and limping slightly. His shirt was torn at the sleeve, blood soaking through the cloth, but he was upright. Adalyn rushed to meet him. "You're hit. Just a graze." He dropped the rifle bag. "Holden's done, the other two ran, they won't come back." Clara stared up at him. "You stopped the bad man," Silas crouched, wincing. "I did." "He won't hurt anyone again." Colton reached out and took his hand, small fingers wrapping around calloused ones. Adalyn's throat tightened. She touched his arm, careful of the blood. "You kept your word." He met her eyes. "So did you?" They made camp on the ridge, not because they had to, but because the sky had turned soft and the wind carried no threat. The children slept between them, curled close. Silas sat with his back to a tree, his side wrapped in cloth. "I never planned on this," he said, voice low. "Neither did I. But I want it now." Adalyn looked at him, the tiredness in her replaced by something quieter. "You mean more than just tonight." "I mean a life," he said, "if you'll let me build it with you." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached across the children's sleeping forms and took his hand. "I will," she said. And for the first time in a long while, they both believed in tomorrow. Morning sun spilled across the ridge in thin bands, lighting up the frost still clinging to the grass. Adalyn sat with her back against a juniper tree, her boots damp, her skirts drawn over her knees. Clara leaned into her side, half asleep, while Colton picked at the frayed hem of Silas's coat, lying folded beside them. Silas returned from the stream with a canteen half full. His left arm was stiff, the bandage spotted through with new red, but he walked steady. He handed the water to Adalyn, then crouched beside Colton. "Tracks are washed out below the pass. Last night's rain cleared the trail," he said. "If we ride slow, we'll reach the Mennonite farmstead before dark." Adalyn passed the canteen to Clara before answering. "Will they take us in long term? They've got room, and hearts bigger than most." He looked toward the trail. "I built their fence line 3 winters back." "They'll remember," she nodded, brushing a pine needle from Clara's hair. "And after that," Silas didn't answer right away. He pulled a piece of jerky from his saddlebag, offered it to Colton, who took it without a word. "You still plan on returning to Elk's Crossing? There's no school left." "The fire took the roof, and I can't bring the children back to ashes." He leaned his back against a rock, careful of his ribs. "There's a town called Burnt Fork, west of here. Small place, but steady. They've got a one-room schoolhouse that's needed a teacher since spring." Adalyn turned to him. "You know the mayor, just the blacksmith," he said. "But that man knows everyone." Clara tugged her sleeve, whispering, "Will we have our own beds?" Adalyn kissed her brow. "We'll make sure of it." Silas rested his hand on his knee, watching the children. "There's a small claim near the river in Burnt Fork. Bit of land, nothing fancy. I'd been thinking of putting up a cabin there." He looked at her then. "More than thinking." Adalyn's gaze didn't falter. "You want us to come with you?" "I do." "If you'll have me." She looked toward the valley where the forest gave way to gold fields and thin fences. "I won't raise them with half promises. You won't have to." She studied his face, the line of his jaw, the way his eyes didn't flinch. "Then yes." "We'll come." They broke camp slowly, careful to leave no trace. Silas lifted Clara into the saddle, making sure her feet tucked firm into the stirrups. Adalyn helped Colton up behind her, then climbed up last. Silas took the reins and led them down the slope, the horse stepping steady through the brush. By late morning, the trees thinned, and the road widened into a rutted track. The valley stretched long and open, with winter wheat stubble and a single wooden cross marking an abandoned wagon site. Silas pointed westward. That ridge line? Mennonite land starts just past it. Adalyn shaded her eyes. And Burnt Fork. Another day's ride past that. We'll rest tonight, then head on at first light. They reached the farmstead before sundown. A woman with sleeves rolled to her elbows opened the gate, her face creased by sun and kindness. She didn't ask questions when she saw the children. She simply nodded and stepped aside. Inside the house, Clara was given a quilt and a stool beside the stove. Colton fell asleep before his head touched the pillow. Adalyn found herself in the kitchen, sleeves damp from washing, hands aching but lighter somehow. Silas stood in the doorway, one shoulder braced against the frame. "You all right?" She dried her palms on her skirt. "I think so." He stepped inside, careful of the lamp's light. "They've offered us the barn loft for the night. It's dry, smells like hay and horses." She smiled. "Better than gunpowder and ash." He stepped closer, his voice quiet. "You're not alone anymore, Adalyn." She looked up at him, her hands still. "I know." Outside, wind moved through the wheat stubble in long, slow waves. Inside, warmth rose from the stove and the silence held no weight. Later in the loft, she lay beside the children, watching the shadows shift across the rafters. Silas sat near the ladder, his rifle across his knees, but his posture easy, not guarding just present. "You really want that land?" she asked softly. He turned his head. "I do, and a cabin with a porch, maybe a garden if you're minded to dig one." She smiled in the dark. "I am." Silas leaned back against the beam, his voice low. "Then that's what we'll build." And in that moment, Adalyn knew this wasn't a rescue, it was a beginning. Not just safety, not just survival, but belonging. Earned and chosen, she reached out, her fingers brushing his. He didn't startle, didn't speak. Just let her hold on, and for the first time since smoke and gunfire filled the sky, she breathed without bracing for what came next. The wagon creaked over the uneven ground, its wheels cutting faint tracks through the damp earth. Adalyn sat beside Silas on the bench seat, Clara curled between them, wrapped in a wool shawl too long for her arms. Colton rode behind in the back, nestled in a bed of straw, his head resting atop a sack of oats. The horse moved at a steady pace, ears flicking at flies, hooves muffled by soft soil. They'd left the Mennonite farmstead just after sunrise, after a quiet breakfast and a promise from the woman who'd taken them in that she'd send word if anyone came looking again. No one had. That chapter had closed with Holden's final breath and the trail gone cold behind them. Ahead, the land sloped gently toward a stand of cottonwoods, their gold leaves flickering in the breeze like coins. Beyond that, just visible through the thinning trees, lay Burnt Fork. A few rooftops, a spire, a plume of chimney smoke. Modest but standing. Silas nodded toward the cluster of buildings. Town's grown since spring. That new roof on the smithy wasn't there last time. Adalyn leaned forward, watching a figure cross the road in the distance. "Does it have a mercantile?" "Two. But only one carries coffee worth drinking." She smiled, brushing a curl from Clara's cheek. "I'll let you point me toward the better one when the time comes." Silas glanced at her hands reddened from work, clean under the nails, and then at her face. "You still sure about this place?" "This life, I'm not looking for perfect," she said. "I'm looking for honest and slow, and built with hands that don't leave when things turn." He didn't say anything, but she saw the way his shoulders eased just slightly. They arrived by mid-morning. The wagon rolled past the blacksmith's, where a boy waved without asking names, and around the bend to a low-slung cabin with a wide porch and an empty hitching post. The door hung square. The windows were unbroken. There was no paint, no trim, just pine and nail and space. Silas pulled back on the reins. "It's not much yet." Adalyn stepped down, lifting Clara with her. "It's more than I've had in years." Colton climbed out on his own, eyes wide. "Is this ours?" She looked to Silas, who nodded. "It will be." Inside, the cabin smelled of dry pine and old sawdust. The hearth stood cold, but the firewood was stacked neat beside it. 2 rooms, one with a bed frame and straw tick, the other empty but full of light. Clara wandered to the window and touched the sill. "No holes," Adalyn crossed to her. "We'll make curtains. You and Colton can pick the cloth." Silas hung his hat on the peg near the door. "I'll start on a chicken coop before the ground freezes. Got a neighbor who mills boards. I'll trade for lumber." Adalyn turned. "You're not doing all of it yourself." "No," he said. "I'm not." The day filled with motion. They unpacked what little they had: blankets, dried apples, a small tin of lye soap. Colton found a hammer and started tapping nails into the doorframe one by one, counting aloud. Clara drew with charcoal on the floorboards, a crooked sun and a horse with 3 legs by dusk. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the cabin smelled of beans and salt pork. Silas sat on the floor, back to the wall, his arm wrapped loosely in fresh gauze. Adalyn knelt beside the hearth, stirring the pot, her sleeves rolled and her eyes soft in the firelight. Colton crawled onto the straw mattress and curled up without a word. Clara followed, thumb in her mouth, her eyes already closed. Adalyn laid a blanket over them. "They've never slept this easy." Silas stood slowly. "They will now." She drew her shawl tighter, turning toward him. "You said once you didn't come for us expecting anything back." "I didn't, but you stayed." "I will." She stepped closer, hands folded at her waist. "I never meant to need anyone again." "I don't need you to need me," he said. "Only want you to want me." Adalyn looked at him for a long moment, at the lines around his eyes, the notch in his brow, the steadiness that had never wavered, not once. Then she reached for his hand. "I do," he exhaled, slow. "Then let's build something that lasts." They stood there in the firelight, hands clasped, the weight between them no longer sorrow but promise. She leaned into him and he pressed his forehead to hers, not rushed, not uncertain, just there, just real. The wind rose outside, rustling the trees, but it didn't reach the cabin. Inside, the warmth held. A month later, the school bell rang for the first time in Burnt Fork since spring. The blackboard had been scrubbed clean, the desks reset. Adalyn stood at the front, her hair pinned, her dress a shade of cotton blue she'd chosen with Clara's help. The children filed in slowly, unsure but curious. Silas waited outside with Colton, who now carried his own small slate and a pencil stub. When the schoolhouse door closed, Silas walked back to the cabin. He had fence posts to finish. The soil was hard, but he liked the work. That evening, when Adalyn came home with chalk on her fingers and a story about a boy who tried to spell chimney with a K, Silas was waiting with coffee and a slice of dried apple pie left by a neighbor. They ate on the porch, watching the sun fall behind the hills, their shoulders touching. Nothing rushed, nothing fragile, just the quiet steadiness of a life chosen. By winter, the coop was finished and Clara named every hen. Colton learned to read his first book cover to cover. The townsfolk began to ask about the woman with the Ohio vowels and the man who never raised his voice. They said they fit, in the way good boots did, quietly, without notice, until one day you realized you couldn't walk right without them. On the first snowfall, Silas stood behind Adalyn at the window, arms around her waist, watching the white gather on the roofline. He kissed her temple once. "You happy?" She leaned back against him. "More than I knew I could be." Outside, the world softened under snow. Inside, nothing was missing. Nothing was left undone. Their life had begun not with lightning, but with the slow, certain build of something meant to last. And it did.